This is Mrs. Miller, your teacher at ELA Academy. Welcome to Part 2 of the annotation demo for Their Eyes Were Watching God. In Part 1, we compared how men of Janie's community court women and treat their wives. In this video, we'll look at two important symbols, Matt Bonner's mule and the vultures. The mule should really be an object of pity because Matt Bonner starves it and overworks it. But the men find the situation highly comical. The great clap of laughter that they've been holding in bursts out. Yeah, Matt, that mule's so skinny till the women is using his rib bones for a rub board and hanging things out on his hock bones to dry. Even though the mule truly is starving and mistreated, the men don't tell Matt to treat it better because they feel sorry for it. It's just another way these guys can create a sideshow that makes everyone laugh and makes them popular. Just like when they made a big deal out of offering to buy Daisy railroad trains and steamships. Even though the guys are joking around, Matt gets defensive. Don't care what I do, I can't get along with him. He fights every inch in front of the plow, and even lay back his ears when I go in the stall to feed him. If you think about it, maybe Matt Bonner created a vicious cycle. He fed the mule too little and worked him too hard, so it got angry and disobedient. So he punished it by feeding it less, and so on. But he blames all of this on the mule, who's really the victim in this situation. Have you ever heard of victim shaming? That's what's going on here. And can you see any parallels with how the men treat their wives? Well, I think Janie sees a parallel. Everybody was having fun at the mule baiting, all but Janie. She has generally coped with her situation by keeping her mouth shut, but she simply can't remain silent here. They ought to be ashamed of theyselves, teasing that poor brute beast like they is, done been worked to death, done had his disposition ruined with mistreatment, and now they gotta finish devilin' him to death. She has compassion for this mule, probably because she can identify with its situation. Remember back in Chapter 2 when her grandmother told her that the black woman is the mule of the world, and the black man dumps his load on the black woman to carry? Jody dumps the burden of the store and of acting the part of the mayor's perfect wife on Janie, then mistreats her for not doing everything perfectly. Like the mule, she is starving for affection and fun and relaxation. Notice how much more complex the annotations are becoming. First, we dealt with the way the men treat the mule and what that tells us about them. Then, we looked at what the symbol, the mule, suggests about the thing it stands for, the black woman. In figuring that out, we made connections between what's happening in Chapter 6 and what happens in earlier chapters. What grandmother said in Chapter 2, as well as the way Logan treated Janie and the promises Jody made to her if she would marry him. When you annotate, always be on the lookout for connections you can make like this. Jody actually does something nice here. He notices how much the mule's well-being means to Janie and decides to buy the mule and let it rest. He tells the other men, "I bought that varmint to let him rest. You didn't have gumption enough to do it." One of the other men replies, "It's a noble thing you done." Okay, so supposedly Jody frees the mule out of respect for Janie's feelings, but that doesn't stop him from turning it into a big PR stunt. Aw, Mayor Starks is so noble, like Abraham Lincoln freeing that mule. It's still all about Jody. Well, now that the mule is free, the men certainly won't quit getting a lot of fun out of him, they just change the way they do it. Anyhow, a free mule in town was something new to talk about. He almost got fat, and they took great pride in him. New lies sprung up about his free mule doings. So, even though they're treating him better and pampering him, he's still the town joke. There still isn't any respect for the mule. Remember, this isn't just about the mule, we're also talking about the wives. Not too long after, the mule dies. It's kind of remarkable because he dies standing up. So when he falls over and rolls onto his back, his legs are sticking straight out like he's still standing. So the men say that he had seen death coming and had stood his ground and fought it like a natural man. Again, this is meant humorously because they're exaggerating the situation for comedy. this gets interesting. I didn't include the previous sentence because of space constraints, but the guys said it looked weird that his legs were sticking straight up. Sam said that it would have been even more unnatural for him to have laid down on his side and died like any other beast. That suggests that this beast was special. Why is that? Well, he was like a hero because he had fought against death like a natural man, standing his ground, fighting on his feet, rather than just lying down and taking it. The point of being a hero is that you rise above the average person. So by acting like a human, the mule naturally rose above his fellow mules. Does this remind you of Jody thinking of himself as being above the other town people? He works very hard to set himself apart from and above the other men, just like he sets Janie apart from the other women, though not for her own sake. It's a way he builds his own prestige as mayor. So we're treating the mule like a hero now. But of course, it's still all meant as a big joke. All right, so Matt Bonner's mule is dead, and he's a mock hero. So of course they're going to give him a huge funeral. I'll leave analyzing the funeral itself to you, but I want to look at the vultures' behavior. Here's where they begin to approach. They closed in circles. Some of the more hungry or daring perched on the carcass. They wanted to begin, but the parson wasn't there, so a messenger was sent to the ruler in a tree where he sat. The flock had to wait. The parson had scented the matter as quickly as any of the rest, but decorum demanded that he sit oblivious until he was notified. If you've watched my Annotation 101 video, you know what I would not want you to do here. Don't just write personification in the margin and move on. You can write it, but let's look more deeply at what the author is suggesting. The vulture's behavior overall reminds me of the way the people act toward the more vulnerable members of the community, like the mule and Matt Bonner, and later Janie herself. Remember the beginning of chapter 1? They're impatient for their opportunity to rip a piece of flesh for themselves. But what about this whole thing with the parson? The parson sounds just like Jody. He's the leader, and they can't begin without him. He makes them wait while he acts very slowly, making everything into a ceremony, like the lighting of the street lamp. It's also like the way he made Matt Bonner wait while he changed his shoes. He savors the power to make people wait. Now look at this strange thing the vultures chant. What killed this man? Bear, bear, fat. What in the world is that about? Well, the vultures seem to be saying that when the mule got to be lazy and praised by the town and gained a lot of weight, that extra fat is what killed him. I don't want to give away any spoilers here, but something happens in a later chapter that you might want to compare to this point. Notice that the vultures called the mule this man. I think the author wants to make sure that we don't miss the comparison. That's it for part 2. In part 3, we'll bring everything back around to our protagonist and the condition of her marriage. We'll also recap all 3 parts of this demo and talk about some larger issues you might investigate. See you then!